All right, Andrew, you're here, our friend. We're really, really excited to have you. And Andrew works at an nonprofit organization called For Kids of South Florida. It is an organization very close to our hearts. Doug, you can talk a little bit more about that as we kick off this episode.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I love to hear you share stories about kids in crisis and connecting people who can do something about that. You're a very skilled advocate, and so I wanted to just talk about your journey. So we know that you started not being a voice for the voiceless, but you started as a Child Protective Investigator. So you saw some gritty things that most people will never see in their entire life. So tell us about a few of those moments where you had to grapple with, this is really happening in our world.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. It's such a privilege to be having this conversation together. As a Child Protective Investigator, like, you're thrown into real life stories and situations that affect real children. But the thing about it is they're so close to where you live. So things that you hear about on the news or you might see on TV, it's actually not a story that's so far-fetched.
Yeah.
It literally, as an investigator, you're investigating it, the abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, right there in your own backyard. So that was something that it's super tense. You have to grapple with it. And for me, it's like, how do I get to bring the love and the light of Jesus into this terrible, terrible scene where we're seeing abuse, neglect, abandonment over and over and over again every day.
Yeah, so you shared some stories with our church and churches all across South Florida, actually, that just, I think, put us in the room. So put us in the room in some of those moments so we can get a grasp of what's going on.
So one of them, and it's kind of local to this area that just has stuck with me over the years, was a story about two little boys and their mother. So their mother was struggling financially, struggling with resources, and while she went to work, she actually would make the decision to leave her 5-year-old son home alone to watch her 1-year-old son. And I don't want to judge the mother at all, because we know, like, brokenness begets more brokenness, right? So no judgment on her, but she did make a poor decision. And that decision did put the children in harm's way. So the older boy that she kind of deemed as the primary caregiver, he was kind of the object of her frustration as I began to uncover more about the investigation. She had a problem with his dad, and as a consequence of that, he bore the brunt of her issues, which is why he was probably the main caregiver of his younger brother. So day in and day out, this little boy was left home alone to watch his 1-year-old brother. And he got to the point where I look at it he was so frustrated with being that. He had to become a parent as a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I can't even imagine, like, leaving or entrusting my 1-year-old son to my 4-year-old or even 7-year-old daughter. So he became so frustrated. He remembered a story that was read to him. I'm not sure exactly who read him the story, but it was Hansel and Gretel. And the trail of breadcrumbs that was left in that story really stuck out to him. So one day he decided that I can't be in this situation anymore. And as a big protective brother, he took his 1-year-old brother by the hand and he opened his front door. And he also grabbed a loaf of bread.
Wow.
And he decided to leave his own home, because he didn't want to be there anymore as a 5-year-old. And as he left, he walked down the sidewalk in the neighborhood that they were living in, and the resilience of this little guy, man, he would tear off pieces of bread and drop them on the sidewalk, probably like every 10 yards, just in case, like, he got lost. He would be able to find his way back home, because he was actually trying to find his grandparents' house. And his grandparents lived probably 10 miles or so away, but in his mind he could get there, and he can also get back if he got lost. So that story really stuck out to me, and I kind of carry that with me as I go into different churches and I advocate for how the church can rise up in this space. That's something that has never left me,
Yeah, so tell me, how widespread is this? Like, are we talking like one or two kids a month, like in our region? Like, how many kids are entering the space that need homes that we need to advocate for?
So At 4 kids right now, we keep a track of the children that we're able to place and the children that we have to say no to. And right now, specifically in Broward County, we're saying no to about 56 kids a month. So what does saying no means? It means that the local managing entity, which is ChildNet, calls 4 kids as a licensing agency and says, hey, there are these kids that have come into foster care. Does 4 kids have any homes that we can place them in? And 57 times a month, we're having to say no.
Wow.
We don't have homes for these kids, just in Broward.
And for people who maybe aren't at all involved in foster care, have never experienced even the system of foster care, when that no comes in, like, are those kids sent on the street, or are they, like, obviously they're not making it into a home, but can you explain what a no means to those kids and what's happening to them then?
It's a great question. And I'll just kind of interject a little bit of information I got last night. And I know we talked about it this past weekend, but we're currently at the place again in child welfare where kids are sleeping in social service offices. And that was a conversation we had yesterday with some of my colleagues at the office. What that means to a child, right, is maybe you spend the night in an office. Maybe you spend the night in a shelter, which a shelter, it's great. There's a roof over your head, but the emotional support, the spiritual support, the mental support, you're not getting that in a shelter. Or, you know, there are a lot of other really good homes, but they might not have the love of Jesus, which is what we try to do. Like, we want to overwhelm the foster care system with families who know and love and can administrate that love of Jesus to these children. So a no to a child could mean that you're in an office, you are in a shelter, or you're going to a home that you might not be able to experience what I believe is the real solution, and that's the love of Jesus.
Yeah, that's why, you know, 4 kids at the very beginning, there was this passion to say, you know, this is what the Bible says pure religion is, caring for widows and orphans in their time of distress. And then asking the question, like, well, if that child doesn't go to a home, where does that child go?
Yeah.
And that's part of, you know, what you've done so well is painting the picture for people, not just giving them numbers. This is the number of kids, but helping us to follow their journey.
Yeah.
And so when I think of your advocacy, I think of this story about a storage unit, because to me that story, like, it breaks my heart, and it makes me think differently about how desperate these kids are in those moments. So tell us that story.
Yeah, I'd love to. So this, by far, is the most impactful case that I had while working as a protective investigator for children. I got this case that basically alleged that a mother was living in a storage unit with her 2-year-old daughter, and the mother was also using drugs and prostituting, all while trying to care for her 2-year-old daughter. And again, I don't ever want to portray judgment against the biological parents. We don't know the situations and the traumas that they've had to come through. But the fact doesn't change that little girl isn't safe if the allegations are true. So I got to the point in this investigation where it became super urgent. And I remember we used to have these unmarked cars, and I remember, like, speeding in my unmarked car so that I can get to the storage facility. And oftentimes when we do these investigations through child welfare, like, you also have to do a joint investigation with law enforcement, just in case there's anything criminal. And also they're there for your protection, because we weren't able to carry weapons or protect ourselves in any way. We're kind of civilian employees. So I'm speeding out to this storage unit, and I know that I'm going to have to take a risk. I know that, like, I just can't wait for the police. So I remember walking up to the storage unit door, and it wasn't a door that you could just open with your hands. I think it was closed and latched, and the only thing I knew to do now was just to kick the door open, you know? So I began to kick the door, and it kind of rolled up, like a warehouse door would roll up. And what was behind that door, it really has changed my life. And I saw that 2-year-old little girl, and she was sitting on the lap of somebody who wasn't her mother. It was a man, a broken man, and you could just tell, looking at him, that He was addicted to some substance. And the little girl, as a 2-year-old now, she's sitting there, and all of the muscles in her body are tense. You could just tell by looking at her. And her head is on like a swivel. And her neck, I just remember her little neck being so stiff, and her face was dirty. And I looked at the man and I said, sir, I think you know that this child's not safe here. And he was rocking back and forth, and he said to me, he didn't look at me, but he said to me, I got to keep this baby safe. It's my job to keep the baby safe. And I looked at him again. I said, sir, I said, I think you know that she has to come with me. And reluctantly, he put that little girl in my arms.
Wow.
And when I held her, I didn't have kids at the time, so I didn't really know that kind of a feeling that you can receive from a child and even give a child, right? And I held her, and all those tense, stiff little muscles, they just melted. And she melted. She didn't know me, but she just melted on my shoulder into my arms. And I believe that she found somebody that was like truly safe.
Yeah.
I think it was a felt safety that I had, and I attribute that only to one person, and that's Jesus. Like, that is the power of who he is in us, in the community, as we advocate for the vulnerable. And that just, it changed my life. Still to this day, changes my life.
Yeah, and that's the thing I notice about really good advocates. They have those origin stories, those moments, like even when you look at the Bible, Paul says to the Corinthians, like, even Jesus, even though he was rich, he became poor for us, so we could share in his richness. Like, there's that origin. Like, why should we be generous? Why should we care? Because someone cared for us when we were in need, and now we get a chance to do that back. So as you think about your life and your origin stories, like what gives you that burden, that calling, that passion to go, I wanna help vulnerable children.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't really shared this story much with anybody. I think I shared it once at a detention center. But in my personal life, I grew up in a real good home, probably middle class, and both my parents were business owners. And I would hang around a lot of the neighborhood kids, and I remember being vulnerable in this particular situation. There was an older guy, teenager at the time. I must have been 8, maybe 7. And we would play together, but there was something kind of off about him. And I remember as a child, basically he would groom me, and he sexually abused me. And I didn't know, like, really what was happening. And all I really knew is that I didn't want my parents to find out because I didn't want to be in trouble. But there was a place in that journey in my life, in that moment of like sexual abuse, where I didn't know who I could talk to or where to turn. Now, of course, my parents they would have killed to know that situation, right? To keep me safe. But I within myself didn't know that, like, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Or, like, I wanted to hide it. And I remember working for, child protection and hearing these stories and being like, oh my gosh, these same allegations of sexual abuse that I'm abusing, that happened to me as a kid. And that began a journey of like healing, right? Where, I was able to, talk to my mother. Oh my God, she's wonderful about it. And it broke her heart. She was in tears and just kind of consoled me and let me know how much she wished she could have been there in that moment. And then the guy, the teenager at the time that, perpetrated, if we're using that language, on me when I was a kid, he always stayed in that neighborhood. And even to my most recent years, like, he's still in that neighborhood.
Wow.
And I remember posting something online about like just the work that we're doing in foster care. And that teenager's dad reached out to me, and he's like, hey, Andrew, I just want you to know how much I champion the work that you're doing, because my grandson, meaning the son of the man who perpetrated on me, is in a foster home, and I think he's in one of your homes.
Wow.
So I remember getting that news, and we were touching base more frequently, you and I, Pastor Doug, and I was like, Pastor Doug, you got to hear this. And just to see the beauty of the full circle of that story, out of the ashes, right?
Yeah,
So many
totally.
ashes. But God allowed me to be a part of that man's vulnerable child.
Yeah.
And putting them in a safe home and providing safety to him when I didn't have it. So that has shaped too a lot of why I am the way that I am and passionate about this space.
No, listen, when I heard that story, I was like, this is an example of the full redemption of God. I think Psalm 130 is like, Israel, put all your hope in God, because with him it's unfailing love and the fullness of redemption, which means every broken moment God is working on to weave together a redemption story. And you don't always get to see it as clearly as you got to see it. But I find that, the advocates, even in the beginning of the 4 kids origin story, there were men and women who were experiencing this either personally or watching it happen. I mean, I remember the 11-year-old at the children's home when I was in college saying, "Hey, Doug, have you ever tried to kill yourself?" Brian Rowe was his name. Wow. That conversation changed my life, just like the storage unit conversation changed your life. Yeah. I remember coming on staff at what would become 4 kids and seeing like a little child with a broken arm and a broken leg trying to walk. And like the same way that image was seared into your mind, that image of that little child trying to walk and thinking, who would do this to a child? And we have to do something about this. Yeah. Advocacy doesn't happen just because you read a post or watch a podcast, for that matter. You got to get into the grit. So talk to us about how you've seen people get into the grit. Like they've responded to your voice, your call, you built the bridge. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think very tangibly, and the greatest need is if you're moved to the point where you want to open up your home and your life to a child of any age, because teenagers are children as well. That is a real-time way to step into the grit. I mean, it even moved me so much. I shared this past weekend. My wife and I have been in this space for about a decade, and we're to the point now where we're like, we got to get a little more gritty. We need to open up our homes, as a young family. So I think that is an incredible way to tangibly, hey, I want to be a foster family. My heart says yes. I don't know all the details. I know that there are different things that I need to do, but I'm willing, and I want God to use my willingness. Like that is, I think, a huge step and a needed step. Another way is, I'm a big champion of prayer. And prayer does, when we consistently pray and effectively pray, not just think about it or carry the heavy burdens, but when we articulate them to an almighty God, there is a power in that. And I would say at every level, anyone who wants to do something in any way, prayer is integral to all that we do and all that we are. Yeah. Another way, volunteering, helping to serve foster families. And this is a nationwide program. Stepping into the space of becoming a care community or like an extended family for a foster family. Yeah. The numbers are crazy. So like the average time a foster family stays a foster family nationally is about 14 months. Well, when you implement this tool of like an extended family, somebody babysitting once a month, somebody bringing a meal once a week, that number jumps from 14 months to the number that we're seeing now at 4 kids is about 39 months.
Wow.
So think about that.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Like you might not be like, I don't know if I can step into the grit, but I can make grandma's lasagna. Yeah.
Totally.
And that would help children. Absolutely it does. Another really good way is something we're really championing now too, is Care Portal. Care Portal is another nationwide tool where instead of kind of being reactive after the abuse, the neglect, abandonment has happened, like foster care is it's good, it's great, but it's very reactive in nature because we have these needs and we have to go to the trauma, right? There's a preventative measure, and that preventative measure is serving the biological families at their time of need before they lose their kids. It might not be an abuse issue or an abandonment issue, but if the neglect issue is resource related, then we, the church, the most resource church in all the world, we can step into that space and
Yeah.
keep families together. So I think those are some really good ways for people to actively, tangibly step in and do a great work that's very biblical.
I love that you mentioned the last part too about prevention, because our last episode we interviewed Charlie from 𝘼𝘼, and their hope is to prevent families from needing 4 kids. They hope that they can prevent a family from being broken up or kids going into the system by dealing with some of the economical hardships or serving families through Care Portal. I mean, sometimes I think you could probably give examples, but like families are just needing groceries or a bed or something so that they're not reported on or the kids removed from the home.
Absolutely. One of the things that I saw a lot in my investigations was like the kids don't have safe sleeping arrangements. They're sleeping on the floor. And I mean, really the thing that's needed is, like you said, Kelly, it's a bed.
It's a bed, yeah.
So it's like, let's remove like the government involvement and all of the referrals and all that. Let's remove that and say, I can get a bed. Like I can go to like, you know, the local store and get a bed with a mattress, or me and a couple of people we can afford that. Beds are a big thing. FPL bills, that's the electric bills here in Florida, like helping to keep the lights on for a family, helps keep a family together. We actually served a Care Portal need where the mom was recently reunified with her children, and the children, they didn't have a place to eat. You know, she just needed 2 high chairs for her young kids, and she couldn't come across these 2 high chairs. And the thing that we needed to get for this family to stay intact was 2 high chairs.
2 high chairs.
So not only did we get the 2 high chairs, other people in our community were like, no, let's get her clothes. Let's get her toys. Let's get her everything she needs. We go and we have a whole Ford Explorer full of goodies for this mom.
Awesome.
She starts crying. And then she's like, I don't know what it is, what it is about you guys. She's like, I need, this is what she said. She says, I need to get back in church.
Wow.
Like, because I showed up with goodies, you know, like that triggered that response in you. So things like that are what Care Portal is about, and how the church and how people can step in and be who we need to be.
Yeah, it doesn't just change that single mom and that child's life. It changes the lives of the people who step into that space, because they're like, this is a world I've never experienced before, but I realize this is happening every day, just a few miles from my house.
Yeah.
And that's how God, we call this like how God gloriously ruins you.
Yeah.
He brings these people in your life and heartache in your life, and you either look away or walk away, or look towards and walk towards.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm grateful that not only have you looked towards and walked towards, but you're saying to other people, hey, follow me. I want to show you something.
Yeah.
Because again, that's what good advocates do. They leverage their life, their experience, their voice, their creativity. I mean, you know, I've seen you do that in 100 different ways.
Yeah.
How can we tell the story and paint this picture to get this person who says they love God and love their neighbor to cross this bridge?
Yeah.
In something that's very unknown and very scary. So you've been also on this journey. Obviously, you're about to open up your own home, you and your wife and your 3 kids. So how has God shaped you? Like as an advocate, you read the scripture, speak for those who can't speak for themselves. You read this pure religion. You're calling the church to do it. You've seen it yourself. But how is God shaping your heart, Andrew's heart, in all of this?
That's a really good question. I think that in my journey as a Christian, or somebody who just wants to live for Jesus, I think we all share this desire to do exactly what this gospel says, to live for Christ and to be like him in this world. And in my journey of exploring what that was and is, it's like sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity. Like, God, should I take this role with a job? Should I give my money here so that I can help this ministry grow? We constantly have these questions of like, okay, is this what I should do with my life? Is this my purpose? Is this my calling, right? Like we always are asking ourselves that as people, but specifically as people who are trying to follow Christ. The one thing that I love and how this space of caring for the vulnerable has shaped me is that it's just so clear.
Yeah.
Like countless times in scripture, like, and we shared this weekend, I think it's in Matthew 18. If you welcome a little one, like this child, if you welcome them into your life, you're welcoming me. I mean, to me, it's like all right, I'm ruined for sure. I
Yeah.
know that this is something that God is all over. And bringing other people into that reality, into that experience, into that clarity for their life is really what's going on in my heart. I'm so passionate about it, and I've experienced so much goodness from it that I want to bring others along.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. So good. Well, hey, we're grateful for your service. We're grateful for your voice. And not that, but I'm also watching, good advocates raise up other advocates. And so even as people watch you make these presentations and share these stories and do podcasts like this, they're thinking like, how can I learn to do this? So if you were going to speak to the future advocates, the next generation of leaders who are going to tell the story about God's goodness and God's redemption and God's justice, like what would you say to them?
I would say don't wait.
That's good.
Don't wait. Like, we have plenty of time to figure things out as we go.
Yeah.
But at
That's true.
at the end of my days, you know what I mean? Like when I go to be with Jesus, I want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Like everything that I put in your world, you did well with. Like, and for me, what that means specifically to me and what I would say to anyone is like, when you know something is good, when you know that it is going to bear not just natural fruit, it does that. It breaks cycles. It helps people connect to something bigger than themselves. It does all that. But the eternal impact is super clear. So this is not something for me that you got to ponder and figure out, like, what's my nuance? What's the niche? How do I step into this space? No, just step in. Don't wait.
Yeah.
And let God paint that picture.
Yeah, no, it's so good. We were joking this morning about how 4Kids started their independent living program. So I met Quincy yesterday. He was the first resident of independent living. And we started independent living at 4Kids because there were 2 kids that aged out of foster care and we didn't have a home. So we grabbed a guy named Tom, said, rent an apartment. These 2 guys are your roommates. You're independent living. Go. That's about as messy and imperfect as you get. But you don't have to figure it out. If God shows you the burden and there's a clear, like, we have to do something. There's something beautiful God does to bring all the pieces together.
I love it.
So thanks for being in the mess and walking toward the mess.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
man. Absolutely.
It's bringing a song to mind. It's an older song, and you probably have never
Are you
heard
going to sing it?
No. No. No, but it's a line that has stuck with me for many, many years, and it's just what's coming up. Now that I have seen, I am responsible. Faith without deed is dead. And that is an advocate, So to even hear the story of 4Kids, if you, the listener, ever get the chance to hear, it really is that. Just now that I have seen these kids, these families, this issue, the way that the government can't do this on their own or can't do it well on their own. No offense, government. You're trying.
They're not listening.
That's another podcast. But really, to just see how advocates always show up and the ones that God has compelled, they become responsible to see that even if they can't solve the problem, they can at least show up for people. Yeah. They can show up for a little girl in a storage unit. They can show up for a little boy walking on the side of the road. And it changes your life, like you said, in the most glorious, ruined way.
Yeah.
But it makes you more like Jesus. And that's all what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your experiences. I know that people listening could think, well, I'm not a child investigator and I don't want to work in foster care. But what you said in the beginning is the real truth here, that this is happening in everybody's neighborhood. This is happening behind closed doors that we can't see behind, but we may be able to get to know our neighbors and realize that something might not be right, or that someone is just waiting for a high chair or a bed to save their family. So thank you for bringing light to this really real reality for people in our neighborhoods. And I can't wait to hear how people might respond. It's exciting. So thanks again.
Awesome. So glad to be here.